Welcome everybody to our lecture series. Just a reminder, these lectures are on Thursday evenings, 6:30. Tuesday. Did I say Thursday? I'm still stuck in last year, and the 4 years before that as well. But also wanted to talk a little bit about the next one, which you will certainly want to attend. That will be Dr. Shani Luft of our philosophy department. Shani specializes in religious studies, but his title will be Inventing Santa Claus. So you will want to be here for that one for sure. Tonight, I have the honor of introducing Dr. Chris Hartleb, who has become something of a friend and colleague over the last 5 years that I've been here. We've had much time in the car together, traveling up to a facility that we run on Lake Superior called the Northern Aquaculture Demonstration Facility. And that's in Bayfield. And many of you know where Bayfield is and perhaps have been there. That is a facility that is second to none in the country in terms of doing demonstration research and outreach for fish farmers in the state of Wisconsin and indeed in the upper Midwest. I want to talk a little bit about Chris's background before I introduce him. Chris received his bachelor's degree from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which was near and dear to my heart. In fact, we still think we might have been in a boat together about 20 years ago. And he was a graduate student, and I was looking at graduate programs. You were an undergraduate student. I was looking at graduate programs at RPI, and we think we might have actually been in a boat together. He got his master's in limnology from the University of New Hampshire and his PhD in fisheries ecology from the University of Maine. He's been a professor of biology here for 18 years, God bless you, Chris, and he has experience working with larval fish, cold and cool water aquaculture, and most recently aquaponics, which he'll talk a little bit about tonight. He teaches courses in aquaculture, aquaponics, fisheries ecology, and field ecology. He is currently the director of our Northern Aquaculture Demonstration Facility. I think you have a picture that you're going to show out of that facility tonight. He is also helping lead in one of the most extraordinary efforts that we had in this campus history, which is a clear public-private partnership with an aquaponics firm out of Montello, Wisconsin, by the name of Nelson and Page. Chris has been the ringleader, or the, I'm not sure what I should call you, Chris, but he has been leading the charge, basically, in aquaponics and in this public-private partnership that we have going with them, leading to a major state grant that we got last year, an economic incentive grant, to the tune of $696,000. And we are partnering with that facility in Montello and building the country's first aquaponics innovation center. And Chris, I'm sure, will talk a little bit more about that. A couple of other things about Chris. He has received both teaching and scholarship awards in the Department of Biology. Currently does half-time work as the director of the facility in Bayfield and teaches half-time in the department as well. I wanted to mention something here also. He has claimed that at least his wife claims that he is glossophobic, which is the trait of glossophobia. Has anyone ever heard of that? Well, it turns out I have the same one, but you won't believe it. Glossophobia is a fear or anxiety of public speaking. And you can clearly see that I suffer from that. Believe it or not, I do. And it's part of being a presenter, it's part of being a person who can engage with their audience, is having a little bit of butterflies and anxiety before they go on stage. And so, without further delay, I'd like to introduce Dr. Chris Hartleb, and his topic tonight is the Blue Revolution, Farming Water to Grow Food. Chris?
Thank you. Well, thank you, and thanks for coming on this nice, warm fall weather that we're having here. So I did want to talk to you about the Blue Revolution. And to start with that, what I'd like to cover a little bit here is a little bit about revolutions. And that is, I thought since this is a kind of a university community lecture series, that we would start with a quiz. Okay? And we'll just go through these, and you should easily be able to answer these. But when it comes to revolutions, let's see what you know about them. What was the main event of the American Revolution? Why did it occur? Oh, that's really sad. A little about freedom in America, new country. Kind of remember those things a little bit? Okay, let's see how you do about foreign relations then. And that is what was the main premise of the French Revolution? Uh-oh. Now they're shaking their heads.
Sound like being in class, right?
Yeah. So, well, they won't like the written exam at the end of this lecture then. So a little bit about changing over from kind of a monarchy over to a democracy. So let's then shift gears a little bit here, and that is the Industrial Revolution. Does that ring a bell? All right, that's basically the modernization of industry into kind of major conglomerates that are out there. And then one of the more recent ones, which some people I know have never heard about it before, but it's the Green Revolution. A lot of people, though, are kind of familiar, especially if you're affiliated with UW-Stevens Point. And the Green Revolution was kind of like the commercialization of large-scale farming. Okay, so we've seen all of these major transitions kind of take place. The most recent revolution, and it's been indicated, it actually was a published article about 5 years ago in the New York Times, introduced the Blue Revolution. Right? And as the title that I had up there said, what the Blue Revolution talks about is this shift to farming and water. Okay? Up till now, most farming has been done on land. But we see this great promise. And one of the things I want to cover in this lecture is that the world is realizing this promise of farming water. The US is actually kind of falling behind. And we're hoping, especially with efforts here at UW-Stevens Point, but even with the United States, that this is going to change. And it may not be a change that we kind of think about right away, but it may be a change that's necessary. Okay, so before I get into the details of farming the water, I kind of wanted to put it into a bit of a perspective. And that is, let's just talk about agriculture or farming. Okay? And one of the statements I want to make is that if modern agriculture were invented today, it probably would not be allowed. Okay, that's a pretty bold statement, but it's true if you think about it. Because when you think about large commercial agriculture, you know that it pollutes the environment. Okay, they use pesticides, they use fertilizers to make the crops grow. And a lot of people are getting more and more concerned about all of this that's being sprayed or applied to our food. Okay, the other fact is that agriculture produces tremendous nutrient streams in the form of feed and waste. And that pollution has got to go somewhere. And people are getting more and more concerned that we don't have a plan as to where it's going to go. And if you think about agriculture in general, it damages habitats and wildlife. Okay? One of the big things I teach in one of the ecology courses is that the Midwestern US looked very different 300 years ago. And what we see it as now looks nothing like that. Okay? Another thing is that when you get into farming, you're really talking about the domestication of animals. And the domestication of animals results in those animals being raised at high densities. And as soon as you put animals in close proximity in high numbers, you wind up having to deal with things such as, do I have to apply hormones to them to make them grow? And how much antibiotics do I have to put in there so that disease doesn't get transmitted? So if you look at that list, you can answer it yourself. Is this something you'd want in your backyard? Okay? So agriculture in general is good that it's been around for thousands of years, because if it came up now, it probably wouldn't be socially accepted. All right? Another thing about farming is that it alters and damages the environment. Okay? Most agriculture, though, really kind of gets away with it, because it's been around for hundreds of years. So that if you think about it, think about, go home tonight, look out in your backyard, and what if an enormous, 1,000-acre dairy farm wanted to open up in your backyard? Would you be happy about it? Generally not, but we know that we need the food. Okay? We need to go to the grocery store, we need to buy the milk and the bread, and in order to feed ourselves. So people kind of accept that agriculture is going to have some negative effects to it, but in general, we'll deal with those effects after they happen. Aquaculture, on the other hand, or fish farming, is kind of the Johnny-come-lately to the agriculture field. And that is that most people don't know much about farming of fish. And it's because of that, whenever a new aquaculture farm wants to open up, it generally doesn't. Right? Permitting, rules, regulations, public outcry kind of prevents it from actually being established. Because people say, well, I don't want them polluting the water in my area. They're going to contaminate the aquifer. They're going to tap into wells and drain all of my drinkable water, because this is aquaculture. So unfortunately, aquaculture is just that. It's the Johnny-come-lately of agriculture, and therefore it kind of gets all of these environmental, social, and economic issues thrown right at it, which is kind of suppressed aquaculture. Right? And there are actually quite a number of fish farmers who say, is this really fair? Do we apply the same rules, the same criteria to a dairy farm that we do to a fish farm? The answer is generally not, and yet aquaculture has to answer to these. One of the things I'll show you is that US aquaculture is answering a lot of these concerns. Globally, there's some bigger questions to answer. Right? Now, I tried just to show as an example for a comparison, because people like to compare things. And I looked for studies where they compared perhaps a fish farm to a dairy farm, or a fish farm to a chicken or poultry farm. And I could only actually find one published study in which they tried to do a comparison between an Atlantic salmon farm and an Angus beef cattle farm to show you the differences and the impacts that those different branches of agriculture are happening. So kind of just to go through this a little bit, what they did is they tried to compare, obviously, apples to oranges here, or fish to cattle, but they tried to make it as equal as they could. So they said, well, if you're going to harvest your Black Angus cattle, right, what you find is that after they harvest that cattle, right, and they remove things such as the guts from it, what remains hanging is about 70% of the cattle's live weight. Right? Then they cut it up and they turn it into the actual meat that a lot of you buy at the store, and that's about 42% of what was that cow or cattle a couple of days ago. Okay? If you look at a salmon, about 84% of its body actually remains after they gut it, and then about 50% of it then actually gets turned into things such as salmon fillets. Okay? Now you put those two together and you can kind of follow the numbers, and again, they tried to make them as equal as possible here, saying, so in the end, the yield you're getting is actually about a 50% yield from a salmon, but you're getting a 42% yield from a cow. Okay? Then they said okay, but where have they been raised? Because this is kind of in line with what are the environmental impacts. And they said, well, you can raise a salmon in about a 1.6 hectare footprint, right? Pretty small. How many hectares or acres of land do you need to raise a cow? And they said, in general, about 7,000. So it takes a lot more space to raise a cow than it does actually to raise a fish. And then the other question they wanted to answer was, okay, well, those salmon, they're going to pollute that environment, they're going to change it, because that's what agriculture does. Well, what about the cow? Right? It's going to pollute, it's going to change, it's going to feed off of that environment. What if we suddenly stopped raising the fish, or we suddenly stopped raising the cow? How long before that perhaps pond or field turns back into what it was before the animal was placed there? And what they showed was that it takes about 2 years for a pond to return to its natural state after you stop farming it with fish. Right? There's probably still fish in it because ponds have fish, but not at the density that you had a farmed fish. But they also showed that it takes greater than 200 years for a field or a pasture to turn back into a wild habitat the way it was before they actually put a cow in it to feed. Right? So it goes back to my question again. Johnny-come-lately is aquaculture, but on the other hand, its impacts tend to be less than what we've already accepted for typical farmed animals such as beef, poultry, or swine. Right? Well, why is this important? Well, if you ask the average consumer, when you eat seafood, where does that seafood come from? Dominant answer that you'll get back is well, I only eat wild, all right? Because that's pure, that's natural. Well, that could be true, or at least it has been true. What this graph shows you is that things are changing, right? It simply shows here the 1950s all the way to the 2000s, and it shows you essentially wild fish that are harvested for us to eat. And what you see is that there are no more underexploited fish out in the ocean. And in fact, most are fully exploited or overexploited, and up to 32% of wild fish are now non-existent. So our source for seafood that we traditionally like and prefer has simply gotten to the point where it's running out. Okay? So if people want to continue to eat seafood, it's going to have to come from somewhere else. And the general answer you'll hear is that it has to come from farms. Okay? All right, how can we see this? What pattern? Can't we recover this? Can't we change this again? Well, we could if we tried hard, but in essence, what you see here is the darker blue and the darker purple shows you the pattern of harvested wild fish from the oceans. And what you see is that it pretty much has plateaued for over the past 20 years. One article that came out a few years back simply was titled, "There are no more fish in the sea." Okay? We are harvesting all the fish that the ocean can produce. And it has been that way for the past 20 years. So even if we want more wild fish, there are no more out there to be caught. We're harvesting all that there are. So as people's diet changes, as the human population on the planet grows, where is the seafood going to come from? Well, that's the lighter blue and the lighter purple. It's going to come from farms. And as you can see, most of the world is taking this seriously, and the number of fish farms is growing almost at an exponential rate. Right? This slide was up there a little while ago, and it simply shows you, and it's even a little outdated. What I can say is that in 2009, 45% of the fish or seafood that's available in markets came from farms. Actually, in 2013, this division was right up and down in the middle. It hit 50-50. Right? What they're projecting is by the year 2030, simply another 15 years out, it's going to be over 60% of fish or seafood is going to come from farms. Right? So that you can see the shift is taking place already. The ocean doesn't have any more fish. So therefore farms are going to have to be the supplier for the seafood that we want to eat. Now this is just a little bit more of a sobering statistic though, and that is, so where are the farms? Where are the farmed fish coming from? Right? If you haven't seen this type of graph before, the size of the circle tells you who's leading and who's producing all those fish. Right? And what you can see is yes, China is producing more fish, farmed fish, than any other nation or region that's out there. Okay? It's followed then by Southeast Asia and then Latin America. They are farming fish. They are exponentially producing fish farms, raising an abundance of fish. The sad part, which we'll get into in a minute, is our little production here is not nearly enough to feed the people in the United States. So a lot of our seafood gets imported into the US. Again, where is it coming from? There's an enormous bubble over here to tell you where seafood is actually coming from. Okay? So if we look at the global perspective of this, you can see aquaculture is growing at a rate of about 3.2% per year. Right? Why is it growing? Well, one is that the per capita consumption of seafood worldwide is growing. Why is that? Well, one of the simplest answers is population growth. And that is, as you know, we just keep populating the earth. Well, as more and more people appear, they've got to be fed. Aquaculture is one of those areas that's going to feed those people. Okay? And the other is areas or countries like China are increasing the production. Okay? Just to show you kind of how staggering that number is, normally if you pick up the newspaper, watch TV, you'll see something that says the top 10 list of this. Well, here is the top 10 list of countries that produce seafood, farm-raised seafood. I actually had to sit there the other day and expand this to the top 15 just to get the US to show up on the chart. Right? That's how little we're actually producing. And if you look at that, we're producing 0.6% of the world's farmed seafood. Okay? Again, no coincidence here, you can see 61% of the world's seafood